Hi, my name is Nick, and today I'm going to teach you about using expressions in After Effects. So the first thing that I'm going to do is give you a brief introduction to expressions, then I'll talk about variables and if and else just a little bit. So to begin, what are expressions? Expressions are snippets of code we can place inside any of our properties in After Effects to make them do interesting things. They're incredibly powerful and will allow us to make controls for intro and outro speeds, allow for automatically resizing boxes, and even create text alignment controls for Premiere users. In fact, every single animation you've seen so far was built from the ground up using expressions. This means that they are easily modifiable. All I have to do is change the text and I can use them in my videos. But enough talk. Let me show you what expressions can do. Okay, let's start by opening After Effects and creating a new project. Once you've made your new project, let's make a new composition. I'm going to call mine main, and let's go ahead and put in a new text layer. Doesn't really matter what you type. I'll put in hello world. And I'm just going to center it real quick, set its position to 960 by 540, maybe move it down just a little bit. So, how do you make your very first expression? Well, you hold down the Alt or Option key, depending on if you're using Mac or Windows, and you click the little stopwatch next to whatever property you want to add an expression to. Since we're going to be changing opacity, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click the stopwatch. There we go, we've got our very first expression. Let's go ahead and set our opacity to 50%. How would we do that? Well, all we have to do is type 50. That's it. Now it's 50%. We could type 25 or 75 or 0. So that's really all an expression is. An expression tells the opacity where to be at. Now we can make really powerful expressions as well too. We can hook expressions up to sliders or checkboxes and automate things. In this same video I'm going to talk about expression controls, and those are really important and help you make powerful expressions. But before we get into that, let's talk about variables. Alright, variables. If you haven't heard of them, that's totally fine. That's why you're watching the video. Really all they are just names that hold little pieces of information. So right now it says 0, and it's setting our opacity to 0. But what if before this 0, I said my opacity equals 50, and put a semicolon at the end? This isn't doing anything yet because we're still setting the expression equal to 0. But how about we try saying my opacity instead of 0. Now it sets it equal to my opacity, and my opacity is equal to 50. And my opacity we can think of as a name or a shortcut. Right now we're creating my opacity and we're saying this equals 50, and that's a new name for 50. So we could say my opacity divided by 2, and that's the same as saying 50 divided by 2. So that's going to be 25. It's really just my opacity now is 50 because we said my opacity equals 50. We could even mess around a little and create an opacity offset variable equals 25, and then instead of setting it to my opacity, we could say my opacity plus opacity offset and put a semicolon. And now it's going to set our opacity to 75. Alright, now let's move on. What we're going to do now is we're going to make a null layer. If you're not quite sure what a null layer is, it's a lot like a layer without anything inside of it. There's lots of fancy uses for a null layer, but all we're going to use ours for is to hold our controls almost as if it was a folder. And we can add a control by right-clicking on our null layer, hovering over Effect, and going to this folder called Expression Controls. Inside of Expression Controls, there's all sorts of things. There's 3D point controls, angle controls, checkboxes, color controls, layer selection controls, point controls, and sliders. They're called Expression Controls because we can interact with them with our expressions. So let's go ahead and make a slider. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that this slider controls the opacity. Once you've made your new slider, go ahead and press the Enter key, and let's rename it Opacity. And you can right-click the value right here and click Edit Value, and this will allow us to change our range, but 0 to 100 is all we need, so we'll leave it to what it is. Just keep that in mind for future reference. Okay, now that we've made our slider, how do we set our opacity equal to the slider? After Effects works in a hierarchy, and it's a bit difficult to get around. There's all sorts of things that we may need to do. We might have to type something interesting like this comp.layer null1 dot effect opacity parentheses slider, and that works perfectly fine. However, it is a bit tedious to type all that out manually. Fortunately, Adobe has given us a really cool tool called the Pick Whip. It's easier and faster to use, and that's what we'll look at right now. All we have to do is just drag the Pick Whip to whatever property we want in our expression, and it will just type in all the code to get there, automatically. Now that we've Pick Whipped our slider to our myOpacity variable, our opacity will always be equal to the slider that we made. I'm going to change the value of my variable, so I'll delete the part that references the slider. Now we can set our myOpacity variable to just about anything we'd like, so let's try something a little weird to prove that. I'm going to Pick Whip my opacity to the rotation of our text, that way the opacity equals the rotation. So, the opacity is at 0, but if we increase the rotation, the opacity increases as well. So the Pick Whip is a very powerful tool, and I use it all the time. I don't try to memorize where everything is. The Pick Whip tool is so much faster than typing everything out manually. For these reasons, I highly recommend using the Pick Whip tool when you can. Now, just before we finish up and move into the next section, I'll go ahead and set the myOpacity variable back to our slider so that we can continue. Alright, we're nearly finished. All that's left is if and else. It's exactly what it sounds like. If this is true, do something, else do something else. Alright, what we're going to do next is we're going to add a subtitle to our text, and we're going to add a checkbox to control if this subtitle is visible. And the checkbox is going to be powered by if and else. So let's make the text. Here's my subtitle. And let's position it so it's moderately centered. I have a video on SourceRect which shows you how to automatically center text in really clever ways. And if you're interested in that, I recommend checking that out. But for now, let's keep it simple and just do everything manually. So here we go, we have our subtitle. I'll go ahead and rename that subtitle. Alright, and let's select our null layer that holds our controls and right click, go to expression controls, and add a checkbox control. A checkbox control is really useful for turning features on and off. I use it in all of my Mogrts to turn on and off my timing guide, which I might tell you guys about in a separate video in the future. And I use it to control settings like flipping animations or reversing certain elements. It's a really flexible and really powerful control. The slider obviously has more settings, but the checkbox has a really cool simplicity to it. Everybody knows how to check something on and off, so it's really intuitive for all your Premiere users if you're making Mogrts. So let's go ahead and take that, drag it into our Essential Graphics panel, and call it Subtitle Visible. And why not rename it in our null layer as well? Subtitle Visible. Beautiful. Now, on our subtitle text right here, let's go ahead and hold Alt or Option, click the stopwatch, throw in this new expression, and let's begin. Let's create a new variable, and let's call it isSubtitleVisible. And we'll set this equal to the checkbox. So if you remember, what we'll do is we'll Pick Whip it, drag the little squirrely thing, and let go on the subtitle visible checkbox. Now, this is a little bit different from a slider because it won't just give us the value. We actually have to type .value on a checkbox, and that will give us true or false as to whether or not it's checked. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So make sure you type .value. So let's set up our if statement. To create an if statement, we write if, two parentheses, and inside of the parentheses we write our condition. Then we have two curly braces, and inside of here, we do something. So the if statement goes, and it checks the condition. If the condition is true, it does something. Else, do something different. So what if the condition was, I'm hungry? If I'm hungry, I'll go eat. Else, I'll do something productive. So the if statement tests. If I'm hungry is true, I'll go eat. Else, I will do something productive. So let's switch this out with what we're using our expression for. So if is subtitle visible, we want it to be at 100% opacity. So 100. Else, we want it to be at 0% opacity. All right, it's hidden. And if we check the checkbox in either the null layer or the essential graphics panel, it pops up. So there we go. We've used an if-else condition to turn on and off a subtitle with a checkbox control. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Leave that in the comments. And just so you know, you were learning JavaScript the whole time, and you can pursue JavaScript at resources like W3 Schools, Codecademy, and other places online. I highly recommend that you learn more about JavaScript because it's fascinating and interesting, and it'll help you get better at expressions. Now that you've made it to the end of the video, let's talk about those freebies. I've left a link to the After Effects file used in this tutorial in the description, and I've also put in one of my Mogrts completely for free. If you'd like to learn more about making awesome Mogrts, check out my other videos. This is what my channel's all about. Once again, thanks for watching. Have a great day.